2025. If you live in Australia or you care about wildlife, you know this wasn't just another year. It was the year the media, the politicians, and the internet decided to declare war on Australia's apex predator. We saw it all. We saw influencers treating ancient reptiles like wrestling buddies. We saw Olympic committees seriously suggest we put elite athletes in rivers that have been in croc territory for millions of years. And we saw the quiet kidnapping of a local legend under the guise of public safety. But here's the kicker. None of this madness stayed on the internet. It went straight to Parliament House. And the result? A suite of new laws and management plans that don't just threaten crocodiles, they actually make you less safe. Today, we're doing a deep dive. We're going to break down exactly how 2025 gave the Queensland Government the perfect ammunition to dismantle decades of conservation. We're going to name the specific influences, both online and in the government. And we're going to explain why the new active removal zones are a ticking time bomb that will eventually get someone killed. This isn't a rant. This is a timeline of how we got conned. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the Great Crocodile Con of 2025. To understand the ridiculous new laws that have been made for crocodile management in Queensland, we really need to look at the specific events that led up to this stage in 2025. We have a new government here in the LNP, or the Liberal National Party. And don't be fooled by the name, it's actually a very right-leaning government right now in Queensland. And basically, culling crocs has been on their agenda for a long time now. But the government didn't just wake up and decide, let's cull crocs. They had to have a perfect storm of public outrage.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
And a little bit of stupidity here and there. And unfortunately, 2025 really built that up in spades. So we're going to look at 4 specific events that actually led us to where we are today. And then we're going to go into detail around these new laws, who the influences are, and how they actually affect people in Queensland and the crocodiles themselves. The first event that we saw that stirred up a lot of controversy, and I feel was the testing grounds for government pushing into crocodile territory, was the Olympic event that they're pushing to host in 2032. So the new Premier of Queensland, Crisafulli, has basically pushed a campaign to say we want the Olympics not only in Brisbane, but in other parts of regional Queensland. And it's part of his drive to say that we haven't forgotten the rest of the state. And so the Olympics are going to be hosted in smaller towns like the Fitzroy area or Rockhampton. The main issue is that the Fitzroy River is a crocodile territory. So basically, there are plenty of crocodiles that actually hang out in the Fitzroy River. It is their local territory. And so the only way that you can really host an event like this is to have an active crocodile management plan. Now, unfortunately, what I suspect they are going to do is that they are essentially using people like the crocodile farm owners who don't really work with crocodiles outside of their farm to say, oh, this is fine, there's no issues. They'll get the local rowers who actually know the crocodiles and know their own management plans internally to say, yep, we're good for the Olympics as well. And I suspect what is going to happen is that they're probably going to go out and do a pretty decent cull of crocodiles before the Olympic Games. And when that happens, there's going to be a sense of complacency with the people that live near the Fitzroy River. So the Olympics, in my opinion, is probably going to go okay. And the risks that, yes, there are rowers coming from overseas, they don't know or understand the risk. I actually don't think that's the major problem. The problem is going to be when Crisafulli leaves the Rockhampton River, Fitzroy River in Rockhampton, and then suddenly you have no major crocodiles because you've culled them, so the junior crocodiles start coming in and trying to fight for that territory. And the big, obviously, problem of that is when you come in as a juvenile crocodile, everything is fair game, and you're going to have a lot more human attacks because people are going to be more complacent, and that's a big problem. The second incident, which drives me a bit nuts, was the issue with TheRealTarzan that actually happened a couple months back. Now, TheRealTarzan actually came in and captured a freshwater crocodile, but there's also images of him capturing a saltwater crocodile with his bare hands. Now, obviously super illegal. This should never have happened. And I understand that this influencer, it does a lot for conservation, but at the same time, I have to lump him in with a lot of the other creators that just go out into the wild unauthorized by a local government or community. And, there are a lot of people out there that capture really dangerous reptiles, including crocodiles and snakes. And the reality is that I would say you're probably trivializing the danger that crocodiles have shown to people. You make them look like toys. And so if you see someone grabbing a crocodile like this, it really uh, it makes things a lot worse for people that are doing conservation, because you're essentially showing visual proof to the local government to say, education doesn't work, crocwise campaigns doesn't work, where they kind of disregard the fact that this guy actively went out and looked for the crocodile. And then they'll do the comparisons to Steve Irwin. Oh, Steve Irwin did the same thing. But the thing is that Steve Irwin was licensed and authorized by the government to go out and perform the surveys of these crocodiles, measure them, understand their habits, all of the things that help keep them safe and help us understand crocodiles further. And so the really issue is that I think the government has used this situation as another smoking gun to say, yep, look, we have to kill crocodiles because people are not smart enough to stay out of their way. And speaking of Steve Irwin, the next event that I think was them testing the water to see whether they could actually perform the management plan they have right now was that they went and captured one of the crocodiles that Steve Irwin works very closely with, Old Faithful. And Old Faithful, he was known to the community. Steve Irwin actually went captured him about 20 plus years ago and did a method of taunting him to see, whether he would be afraid of humans. And it actually worked for a really long time. So the crocodile itself was taunted, avoided humans. But then what had happened was that 20 plus years later, someone, anonymously actually raised a report saying he'd been targeting boats. There was not really a lot of consultation around the fact of, oh, this is the evidence, this is who reported it, and this is the series of events that led us to this decision. It was very much someone raised an anonymous tip. They sent an email to the local Indigenous advisory board that is governing a lot of the crocodile issues and should be working in conjunction with the government. So basically the government said, this is a problem croc, we're going to go take him out. So they took him out and they chucked him into a little facility. So this is the pool that he was hanging out in at the time. And obviously very different to the territory that he was very familiar with. And he's an 80-year-old crocodile. He's not exactly young. So you've taken this really old crocodile, moved him into a swimming pool, basically. And then it took several weeks of back and forth to figure out, where are we going to put this crocodile? And basically, the Indigenous community in Australia advised them, hey, there's a piece of land that's probably a couple 100 kilometers away from where you picked Old Faithful up. Move him there. It's owned by the Steve Irwin Conservation Group. So, we know it's the right people, it'll be looked after, and it's basically these people see crocodiles as totems, which is kind of like part of the family. But instead of doing that, a couple of days later, we just saw on the news that Australia Zoo announces, Old Faithful is coming back to the zoo. It's like, so hold on, you've got an Indigenous community that's saying, you need to move him into a very similar environment, wildlife conservation area, and suddenly you've got this then big PR campaign by Australia Zoo saying, hey, we rescued Old Faithful. But why did he need rescuing in the first place? And then the other question was, why was the Aboriginal community ignored? So we're seeing a lot of clash from this, but I honestly feel like this was the testing bed to see how far the Queensland Government could push the agenda here and see if they could actually, go against the grain of what has been the norm for a long time now on croc management. And I think for them, this actually worked out very well, that they knew that they could get away with this, and because they could get away with this, they could start doing this at scale, which is what they're starting to now implement under crocodile management laws. And then the final event that I think really shook a lot of people, especially in the Brisbane suburbs, people that don't understand crocodile management in general, there was a 14-year-old boy that was bitten on the leg and the abdomen by a crocodile in far north Queensland. And it's quite distressing because obviously knowing a child has been attacked by a crocodile is really, upsetting to even consider. At the same time, he was in an area that was clearly signposted as a very dangerous crocodile territory. He's 14, he's waist deep in water that you can't see it. The question really should stand as, instead of why was this crocodile attacking this child, it should be why was the child in there in the first place? It's negligence from the actual parents of the child. And this is where I think they use this as a smoking gun, but the reality was it's probably more the fault of the parent and, to a degree, the child and the management of advisory to make sure the community understood the risks better. So this is something that I think was a really smoking gun that the Queensland Government used. And from there, we need to look at who was actually responsible for this. So we had the events in 2025, but events don't pass laws. This year, the key influences in Parliament that caused a lot of these laws to come into fruition now in late 2025 were generally groups of influencers that have been planning this since 2024. The first key influencer was the Katter Party. Now, Bob Katter, you probably recognize him from the guy that was doing the whole let 1,000 blossoms bloom, but I'm not spending any time on it because of the crocodiles. His party and his son, who's now leading the party, essentially proposed a new bill to essentially do safari-style hunting of crocodiles, give farmers more rights to own more guns to shoot crocodiles on site, and even do egg harvesting. And basically, it was the farthest extreme of what you could propose in Parliament. They knew that it wasn't going to get passed, but the whole idea was to shift the bar so that if this was the extreme, then the bar is raised basically to sort of show that, hey, if I can't do safari hunting, maybe I can do exclusion zones, which is exactly what's happened with the new laws that have come into Queensland. Now, in terms of the next person who took advantage of what happened here, David Crisafulli is very politically savvy when it comes to a lot of this. He knew that the Katter Party had a lot of control in regional Queensland, and the LNP are obviously trying to break into these segments in Queensland to make sure it's not just a Brisbane and Gold Coast base, but he wants the entirety of Queensland to follow and back what he's saying. So, of course, if the Katter Party is trying to build an audience in the regional parts of Queensland, he's going to cater towards them a bit more. And so, fresh off his recent election win, Crisafulli needed to show he's listening to these Queenslanders without officially sanctioning a cull. Because if he sanctions a cull, the voters in Brisbane are going to be really pissed off. So David Crisafulli used the Tarzan incident. He basically called him a goose to position himself as the sensible adult. But behind the scenes, his government, specifically the Environment Minister, Andrew Powell, had a lot more plans behind the scenes to draft the new management plan. And this plan gives Katter voters exactly what they wanted: dead or removed crocodiles. But it calls it public safety instead of culling. Basically, it's a rebrand of what we've seen in the Katter Party bill, but not to the extremes of doing safaris. And finally, the most controversial player, which I think actually plays a huge part into the problems that we've seen today, Australia Zoo. Because it's really hard for me to say this as someone who's followed Steve-O and who's actually inspired by what he did growing up as a kid. But when Old Faithful was kidnapped from Lakefield, Australia Zoo kind of just accepted him and then ran that massive PR campaign saying, the Old Faithful is returned to the Australia Zoo. But by taking that croc, they've legitimized the removal. They gave the government a massive PR win, and instead of being the headline, government steals cultural icon from Indigenous land, it's changed the headline to be croc rescued and sent to the home of crocodile hunter Steve Irwin. So it silenced the outcry, which means then there's nothing more people can complain about. And because it sanitized that removal, it left the traditional owners completely voiceless. So I think when we start to then go back to what the Katter Party did, they screamed. The Premier panicked from wanting voters to make sure they felt listened to. And then you've got influencers like Australia Zoo, like TheRealTarzan, and others around providing all these distractions and reinforcement for the government to do the new crocodile management plan of late 2025. Now, the plan itself, when you look at it on paper, sounds pretty boring. You know, they've basically called these things div removal zones as a way to downplay what they're actually doing. It's basically kill zones. And they've highlighted a significant part of Queensland to essentially be active removal zones where anyone from either the public or just Queensland Park and Wildlife Services people can see crocodiles, report them, and they'll be removed. And by removed, it's most likely going to be culled. So when we look at this bill, the goal is no longer about management. It's about, I guess, exclusion. And they're trying to create croc-free bubbles in a tropical ecosystem. The issue is, and I'll always say this, is that you cannot just remove crocodiles and expect them to never return. All you're doing is creating complacent individuals that will eventually be targeted by a new crocodile. And this is why these laws are going to get people hurt. I'm not being dramatic here. I'm looking at the biology. Because everyone becomes complacent, they are a target. When you remove that dominant male, like Old Faithful, or clean out a removal zone, you don't get an empty river, you get a vacuum. And when David Crisafulli says, don't worry, we have declared this an active removal zone, people hear that, oh, I can swim in the water, I can fish, I can go knee deep in the water, I can do whatever they want. And that means you're not going to have spotters. You're not going to have people looking out for crocodiles while you're swimming. You're going to have dogs let off their leash to go on the bank and be the bait for crocodiles. They might even go for a swim in the night. Like, you just don't know. So you can't sanitize these tropical waterways in Queensland. It's impossible. Crocs move, floods happen. But pretending they can, the government is luring people into this trap. And the next attack won't be because the crocodile was aggressive, as much as news headlines will say that. It'll be because someone thought the government had fixed the problem. If every sighting results in a removal team, the public is going to lose the ability to live with the risk. We basically are losing our bush smarts. You want to talk about a nanny state? This will be one. Because if every single person that takes a photo of a crocodile expects it to be removed, we become dependent on the government service that couldn't possibly scale to what we're looking for here. And we're breeding a generation of Queenslanders who think the wild has been tamed. Also, I grew up in Queensland. If we are not respecting the land in Queensland and we're just becoming that nanny state, that is very anti-Queenslander. We know the bush, we are bush smart, and we should know better than this. So 2025 was testing ground. They tested how much outrage they could manufacture to test how easily they could ignore the science. And they tested it quickly to make sure that they can include these new laws. And I suspect if it goes away and it does really well next year for their brownie points or political points, they'll do further and they may introduce even scarier laws next year. So how can we help? How can we fix this? Well, the big thing you need to do if you're living in Queensland, reach out to your MPs. You need to make your voice loud and clear about this all the way through Queensland. There's a couple of pages that you can follow. I'll leave it in the description that will keep you up to date on what is happening in Queensland with crocodiles and some of the news as well that is not biased towards what you may see on social media and other things. But the other thing is be croc-wise. Don't just listen to people that say, oh, there's no crocodiles here, they've been culled recently. If you are in crocodile territory in the tropics, you assume every body of water has a crocodile in it. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this new format. I will be going out and about eventually soon, but I figured this is more important for me to get some more information to you guys. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2026. Enjoy.